The wind that swept through the prairie was sharp and biting, carrying with it the dust of a long, dry summer. In a little cabin on the edge of a forgotten trail, a tiny girl named Mary sat on the worn steps of her porch, her bare feet tucked beneath her thin dress. She was no more than 9 years old, small for her age, with a face that carried both the innocence of childhood and the weight of hardship. Her father had been gone for nearly a year, lost to a fever that swept through the nearby town. Her mother, frail and weary, worked herself thin doing laundry for settlers and travelers who sometimes passed along the trail. Mary had learned to live with less food, less warmth, fewer toys, and far fewer friends. Yet, she carried inside her something the prairie winds could never strip away, a heart that refused to grow cold. That morning, as she gathered a small bundle of twigs for their cooking fire, she heard the faintest sound, like the whimper of a wounded animal. Curiosity tugged at her, and she followed the noise beyond the cabin, toward the line of cottonwoods near the creek bed. At first, she thought it might be a stray dog, but as she crept closer, her eyes widened. There, half hidden beneath the brush, was a boy, not much older than herself. His hair was long and black, his skin bronze, his clothes torn and dirty. He clutched at his leg, which was twisted in a way that made her chest ache. Blood stained his ankle, and he looked up at her with eyes that were dark, deep, and filled with both pain and fear. Mary froze. She had heard whispers in town about native children, warnings spoken in harsh tones by settlers who feared what they did not understand. Yet standing before her now was not an enemy, not a threat, but just a boy. A boy in pain. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly, stepping closer despite the racing of her heart. The boy flinched, his hand reaching for a small stone as if to defend himself. But Mary raised her empty palms and shook her head. "I won't hurt you. I promise." For a moment, the boy only stared, his chest rising and falling quickly. Then, with a wince, he lowered the stone. Mary knelt beside him, her tiny hands trembling. She had nothing to give, no medicine, no proper bandages. But she had kindness. Tearing a strip from the hem of her already tattered dress, she dipped it into the creek, wrung out the water, and gently pressed it against his swollen ankle. The boy winced but did not pull away. "My name's Mary," she whispered. "What's yours?" The boy hesitated, then murmured, "Tahu." She smiled. "Tahu. That's a strong name." For hours, Mary sat with him, cooling his fevered brow with damp cloths, humming soft songs her mother used to sing. She offered him the last piece of bread she had tucked in her pocket, watching as he ate slowly, hunger etched into his every movement. When the sun began to dip low, Mary knew she had to return home, but she could not bear to leave him helpless. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Don't be afraid." Tahu looked at her then, his dark eyes softening. He said nothing, but in the silence, Mary felt a bond forming, fragile, but real. The next morning, Mary rose before dawn. She tucked a small bundle of scraps, half a potato, a crust of bread, and a few wild berries, into a cloth and slipped out of the cabin before her mother stirred. She hurried to the cottonwoods, her heart quickening as she wondered if Tahu would still be there. He was. His ankle was still swollen, but he smiled faintly when he saw her. Mary knelt beside him, offering the food. "It's not much," she said, embarrassed. But to Tahu, it was a feast. He ate slowly, carefully, and when he was done, he whispered, "Thank you." For 3 days, Mary tended to him in secret, bringing what little she could spare, singing songs to ease his pain, and keeping watch while he rested. She never asked where he had come from, never asked why he was alone. All she knew was that he needed help, and she could give it. On the 4th morning, when Mary returned to the creek, Tahu was gone. Panic struck her, but in the soft dirt near the trees, she found something left behind, a small carved figure of a bird, smooth and polished. She held it in her hands, her throat tight. He had left her a gift. That night, as the wind howled outside their cabin, Mary sat staring at the tiny carving by the firelight. She wondered if she would ever see Tahu again. She wondered if he had made it safely back to his people. And then she heard it, hooves pounding against the earth, growing louder and louder until they shook the very walls of their cabin. Her mother gasped, rushing to the window. Outside, under the moonlight, shadows moved, dozens of them. Horses, tall and proud, their riders straight-backed and silent. Warriors. Mary's heart pounded in her chest. She clutched the carving tightly as the sound of knocking thundered against their door. Her mother's face turned pale. "Mary, stay behind me." But Mary, with a courage that surprised even herself, stepped forward. She pulled open the door, and her breath caught. Before her stood 40 native warriors, their faces solemn, their eyes sharp and unreadable. Their horses snorted in the cool night air, their presence both powerful and terrifying. And then, through the crowd, she saw him. Tahu. He was seated on a pony, his ankle now wrapped in leather bindings, his face brighter, stronger. He raised his hand, and the warriors parted to let him through. The tallest of the men dismounted, his chest adorned with beads and feathers. His eyes fell on Mary, and though his face was stern, there was something gentle beneath his gaze. He spoke, his voice deep and commanding, but Mary did not understand the words. Tahu translated, his voice clear, "This is my father, Chief Ahyv. He says you saved his son. He says, you are a friend to our people." Mary blinked back tears as the chief knelt before her. From a pouch at his side, he drew out a necklace, its pendant carved from bone and polished smooth. He placed it around her neck, his large hands surprisingly tender. "Little one," Tahu translated, "you gave when you had nothing. You healed when others would have turned away. For this, our people honor you." Mary's mother stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. The fear that had gripped her melted into something else, something lighter, warmer. One by one, the warriors dismounted, bowing their heads to the tiny girl who had shown compassion to their child. Some laid gifts at her feet, woven blankets, baskets of food, a pouch of herbs. Others simply touched their hands to their hearts in silent respect. Mary could not speak. She could only hold the little carving of the bird in one hand, the bone necklace at her chest, and look at Tahu, who smiled at her with gratitude that needed no words. From that day forward, Mary's life was never the same. The cabin that had once been filled with emptiness was now filled with gifts, food enough to last the winter, blankets to keep them warm, herbs to heal their sickness. But more than that, their lives were filled with friendship. The warriors returned often, not with demands, but with kindness. They taught Mary's mother how to use herbs to ease pain, showed Mary how to weave baskets, and even brought her small animals to care for. Tahu, once a stranger in the brush, became her closest friend. In time, the settlers in town heard whispers of the little girl who had once been poor and forgotten, now honored by a mighty people. Some mocked, others marveled, but Mary did not care. She knew the truth. Kindness, even the smallest act, could ripple outward like a stone cast into water. Her torn dress, her tiny scraps of food, her gentle songs, those had been enough to bridge the gap between two worlds. Enough to change everything. And on quiet nights, when Mary sat by the fire, she would touch the necklace at her chest and remember the knock at the door, the 40 warriors who had come not with vengeance, but with gratitude. She had once been a tiny girl with nothing. But in giving what little she had gained everything. Final message. This is the story of how compassion transforms lives. No act of kindness is ever too small. A crust of bread, a torn strip of cloth, a gentle word, these things may seem tiny, but to someone in need, they can mean the world. Mary's gift was not in her strength, but in her heart. And because of that, she discovered a truth that would follow her forever. When we give selflessly, we open the door to miracles far greater than ourselves.